design computer games. And there isn't a critical amount of teachers out there that have the experience or the language for them to speak to the students about this as a design form.
Yeah, it occurs to me listening to you talk about the game just now that, you know, we writers have to worry about writing a good book or writing a good article, but we don't have to worry about going out and explaining to people why articles and books can be good, you know, are worthwhile to read. Whereas it seems like part of your job, on top of everything else you have to do as a designer, is that you sort of necessarily also have to be an evangelist for this art form. And I was wondering, does that frustrate you? Would you rather just have done with that and just concentrate on your work?
I think that's a property of the art form being in a very kind of early, undeveloped state, which, you know, is exactly why I find it interesting and remarkable, because there's this huge amount of unexplored space in the medium. But at the same time, you know, people tend to associate games with the reptilian brain. You know, they're about aggression, fear, anxiety. And I think games are slowly kind of evolving out toward the cerebral cortex. And so, but I think, you know, games certainly have the ability to kind of go there. One of the really interesting things about games to me long term is the fact that as you play a game, and this is something that we're doing very early on at Spore a little bit, is that the player's in some sense building a model of what they play. They're playing with a Toy City or a Toy World, Toy Planet, and they're actually building a model in their head, a more elaborate model than they had before. So in some sense, that's the real model we're building, is in the player's head, not in the computer. The computer is just a compiler for what the player is building. But at the same time, we're getting to the point where we can observe what the player does and have the computer build a model of the player and come to understand what you enjoy doing, what your skill level is, what your aesthetics are. And it can actually start modifying the game around each player individually.
The game's playing you.
Well, it's basically evolving to fit you. You know, it's inherently possible for games to start to evolve to fit each individual player, which makes them a wholly unique form of media.
Yeah.
And I think that's like an incredibly exciting kind of aspect of where this might go.
Yeah, that is exciting. One of the great things about your work is that you use science to tell stories. Sim Earth, which is another one of his games, kind of uses earth science to create stories. You talked about astronomy and principles of astronomy and Spore. I write about science quite a bit, and I often find there's, at some level, sort of a conflict between science and the principles of science and doing science and designing experiments and narrative and the need to create stories out of science, because narrative is inherently kind of smoke and mirrors at a certain point.
Yeah, narrative is inherently kind of subjective, whereas science wants to be inherently objective.
Yeah.
Science wants to be reproducible from any given viewpoint, any given scientist, whereas narrative is really told from a specific viewpoint and is very interpretive in its essence. So I think, you know, but at the same time, you talk to a lot of scientists, and it turns out that they approach science, you know, really from deep intuition, and they use experimental data to kind of support their intuition, but really it's amazing how many of them are guided by things like faith and intuition. And in some sense, in their own head, they have kind of a narrative around where they're going with it. And then they have to support that with external data under real science.
Interesting. Sure. Well, I think we're out of time, and I should add at the end, people might be wondering, when can I go and get a copy of Spore? This is sort of like the $20,000 question, but I'm been told the end of the year.
Around the end of the year,
Around the end of the year, maybe for Christmas, we can all have Spore.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks to Will Wright. Thank you very much.